All right, hey everybody, welcome back. It's Gene again, and I have another video for you today about the PC-12. Thought we would talk a little bit more about starting the engine. This seems to be a topic that a lot of people are interested in and have questions about, or just don't know how it works in a turbine engine. So I thought I would show you a little bit more about how this works, especially with a warm engine. And I've gotten the chance to do some mentor flying for pilots that are working on a turbine transition, which means that maybe they've been flying a high performance piston airplane and they're stepping up into a turboprop or a jet for the first time, and they're just learning about the differences and things. And the interesting thing about it is turbine engines are actually simpler and safer and easier to manage than high performance piston engines are. So piston engines require a lot more care and manipulation than turbine engines do. So once you know where to look and how it all works and you can manage the speed and things like that, it's really easier flying for the most part. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you today about what we do on a warm start and a turboprop. So this is a GoPro video that I shot after a quick turn. So I had flown a short leg to this airport, picked up some additional passengers, and then quick turned out of there. So the engine was still nice and warm when I got back in to start up. So I had to motor the engine down. So wanted to show you what that looks like. And let me pull this up here. So I actually was able to blow up the this part of the panel right here where the engine instruments are. It's a little bit blurry, but I think you can kind of see. So this is, this is the ITT here. This is the torque. This is the NG. Then you have oil pressure and temperature over here. So I think you can kind of see those a little bit. And I'll show you when I start the engine what those do. But so yeah, I wanted to show you how this works with a warm start. And I know in piston engines, a lot of you guys are probably familiar with the term hot start, which means something completely different in a turbine engine. That's a big no-no in a turbine engine. Hot start in a turbine engine means you probably damage the engine, and it's a big deal. Hot start in a piston airplane means that the engine is warm from a previous flight, and you're getting in and you're going to start the engine with no prime or less prime and go through that procedure. We call that a warm start in a turbine engine, not a hot start, because a hot start's a whole different thing. So this is a warm start. So you can see here my ITT is at 250, 260 degrees Celsius, pretty warm. And if I were to start the engine without motoring the engine down, and what that means is it's called dry motoring. So that means that I'm going to run the starter motor with the battery. And when that happens, the battery is just turning the engine. And so the engine is running without combustion at a slow RPM. So it's ingesting air, it's drawing air into the engine, and the engine is actually just sucking air through and it's blowing heat out. So it's a way of cooling the engine down. So it's like if you get hot soup and it's too hot to eat and you blow on it to take the heat away, that's essentially what we're accomplishing when we motor an engine down. So what we want to do is engage the starter, let the starter turn the engine at about 18% NG or so, wherever it tops out, might be a little bit above that. And then watch our ITT right here. And that ITT is going to come down fast as we're blowing on that hot soup. As that air is passing through the engine, it's carrying the heat away without any combustion in there yet. And we're going to get that ITT down to where we want it, which in the 67B and the 67P engines and the PC-12, that's 150 degrees Celsius. Once we get down to about 150, then we can introduce fuel and light the engine off using the normal procedure. So if we didn't do that, and this is kind of a gotcha with new turbine pilots, if maybe they're not checking the ITT and they get in after a quick turn and the engine's still nice and warm, and they just pop the battery on, pop the beacon on, engage the starter, they get their NG up to 13 to 18% where it needs to be to light the engine off, and they pop fuel in, you can overtemp the engine. So you got to motor it down first. So the reason we have to get the ITT down to 150 degrees Celsius first is because when we light the engine off, the ITT is going to rise a whole bunch, and it's going to come up almost to its limitation. So we don't want to exceed any limitations. If we don't motor it down to 150 and get it nice and cool before we introduce fuel, when we light the engine off, we're potentially going to have a temperature exceedance, which is bad for the engine, right? So we've got to motor it down first. So that's really all there is to it. And then we just go through like the normal start. We're watching the ITT, of course, primarily for a hot start. We're watching the NG down here for a hung start, watching the oil pressure develop beforehand, and just all the normal stuff. So I'm going to play this. So here I'm just turning the beacon on, giving the marshal the start signal. All right, so I engage the starter there. Watch the ITT. So it's coming down through 200 there. So I'm going to pause it for just 1 second. Notice down here that the NG is at 19.7%. So I could light the engine off, right? I have the NG that I need right now to introduce fuel. So the engine will light off at that rotational speed. No problem at all. But the ITT is not low enough yet. So you have to remember that you're not just looking at the NG and waiting for a particular NG. You're looking here, and then you're also looking here to check to make sure that your ITT is low enough for start after a quick turn like this. So if it's after the first, if say you're getting in the airplane for the first flight of the day and the engine's cold, the ITT is going to be nice and low and you don't even have to think about it. But if the airplane has flown recently, you've got to check this. So I engage the starter. I've got my finger up here. That's the starter interrupt button in case I need to cut the starter out in case there's a malfunction or something goes wrong. That's just standard procedure. And I'm just letting the engine motor at about 19-20% right here. And I'm just watching the ITT and I'm letting it come down to about 150. Just waiting. You see the prop turning out there. So there's 150. So right there I introduced fuel and let the engine off. So watch the ITT. Shooting up, NG's developing. So we topped out right around 730 degrees there. And if we had started the engine, and then, we remember in the 67 P and B, we have the ITT rollback, and then as the second stage of injectors start to spray fuel in, the ITT comes up even more. So now we're at 750, 760. So if we would have started the engine, if I would have introduced fuel and let the engine off where we started, we would have had a temperature exceedance. So that's why you don't want to do that. So anyway, ITT's coming down now. NG's stable at ground idle. That's a good start. So I'm just checking the flight controls, giving him the disconnect signal, and that's basically where that video ends. So anyway, if you've been around the airport and you've seen a turboprop starting up, you've probably seen this happen. So you hear the engine RPM, like it starts to spool up and it's spooling and spooling, and then it kind of tops out and it just keeps winding, it just keeps spooling at that RPM, and then you hear the pop and the light off. That's because the pilot was motoring the engine down because the engine was warm. So they do have to do this occasionally in Gulf Streams and things, like with the bigger turbofan engines. They call it a rotor bow. And a rotor bow means that as the engine cools down after a flight, it cools down at different rates. Different parts of the engine are going to cool down quicker than others. And the rotor axis actually bows a little bit. It bends a little bit. So you have to, you don't want to start the engine like that, otherwise you're going to have an imbalance. So you actually have to motor the engine and do a rotor bow to cool that off in a more uniform way before you light the engine off. So this can happen in turbofan or just jet engines as well as turboprops. But anyway, I thought you guys might find that interesting. Hope that clears up some questions you may have had. If you have any additional questions or other video ideas, I'm always looking for those. Please don't hesitate to leave those in the comments. And as always, please consider subscribing if you like this stuff. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.